Her voice cracked through the speakers before I even saw her, shrill, furious, echoing inside my son's live boxing stream. Then came the crash, our front door swinging open, slamming against the wall. Gloves still on, my son turned, stunned, as the HOA president, Karen, stormed into our garage, screaming about unauthorized activity. She didn't know the camera was rolling. She didn't know hundreds were watching. She didn't know the FBI would see it next. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. I'm not a soldier. I'm not a cop. I don't wear a badge or carry a gun. I'm an architect. I build homes. That might sound like a quiet profession, like I spend my life sketching lines on paper and watching others hammer nails. But what I really do is imagine futures, spaces where families can feel safe, where kids can laugh, where people grow old without fear. Every beam, every foundation I design is meant to outlast me. That's who I am. That's what I believe in. And that's why I fought back. My wife, Rachel, is a nurse. She's the kind of person who holds strangers' hands through their worst nights, who comforts patients when their families can't be there. She gives her strength away every single day, and somehow still has enough left to smile when she comes home. Our son, Ethan, is 16. He's lean, driven, and fearless in the way only teenagers can be. But unlike most kids his age, he doesn't waste energy on posturing. He's focused. Since he was 10, he's been obsessed with boxing. Not for violence, but for discipline. Boxing gave him confidence. It gave him a place to put all that restless energy. It gave him a dream, one day, to compete at a professional level. When the pandemic hit, we converted our garage into his training studio. A punching bag, gloves, mats, and a tripod with a camera that connected him to his coach over Zoom. Nothing fancy. Just a father doing what he could to keep his kid's dream alive. When we bought this place, I thought I was buying peace. A quiet cul-de-sac, with trimmed lawns and neighborly smiles. A home where Ethan could grow up safe, where Rachel could breathe after long shifts, where I could finally feel like all the years of saving had paid off. The Homeowners Association promised order, clean sidewalks, maintain landscaping, security patrols. They said it would keep property values high and neighbors accountable. But the truth? The HOA wasn't about community. It was about control. And at the center of that control was one woman, the president, the one we all call Karen. I didn't pick this fight. I didn't go looking for trouble. But when trouble came crashing through our door, literally, I realized something. I wasn't just protecting property lines or HOA bylaws. I was protecting my family. I was protecting my son's dream. Because Ethan wasn't just boxing in that garage. He was building himself. Every punch he threw was a step toward confidence, toward independence, toward manhood. And when Karen tried to tear that down, when she tried to tell us what we could and couldn't do inside our own walls, she wasn't just meddling with rules. She was robbing him of something sacred, and I couldn't stand by and watch. Maybe Karen thought she could intimidate me. Maybe she thought I was just another homeowner too tired to fight, too busy with work to push back. But I wasn't built that way. Architecture teaches patience. You don't just build a skyscraper. You gather evidence, draft plans, calculate angles, prepare for every failure before the first brick is laid. You learn how to fight battles with logic, with proof, with an iron will. I wasn't a fighter in the ring, like Ethan. But I knew how to stand my ground. I knew how to gather facts, build a case, and make it undeniable. And when the HOA war began, that's exactly what I did. Still, I won't lie, it hurt. Watching Rachel come home from a 12-hour hospital shift, only to find violation notices taped to our door. Watching Ethan's focus crack when Karen marched across our lawn to inspect our garage. Watching my own sanctuary, the home I built for them, turn into a battlefield. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about an HOA rule. It wasn't about a noise complaint or a zoning violation. It was about power. About a woman who thought she could bend an entire neighborhood to her will, no matter who she had to break along the way. And when she set her sights on my son, she crossed the line. You don't mess with my family. You don't break a 16-year-old spirit because you crave control. You don't barge into a nurse's home after she's worked herself to exhaustion, saving strangers' lives. And you don't bully an architect who knows how to build things that last longer than tyrants. That's why I fought. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Because the moment Karen turned her crusade against us, I understood. Either I stood up to her, or I let her rule over everything we loved, and I wasn't about to let that happen. You don't really see a tyrant for who they are the first time they knock on your door. At first you tell yourself it's a misunderstanding. Maybe they're just strict. Maybe they're just bored. But then the pattern begins. And with Karen, the pattern was unmistakable. She didn't just enforce rules, she weaponized them. It started small, a yellow slip taped to our front door, trash cans visible from the street. We lived on a cul-de-sac. Every single house had their bins out front on pickup day. But ours? She singled it out. A week later, garage door left open. Of course it was open. Ethan was training, his coach watching live over Zoom. But Karen's complaint wasn't about safety or aesthetics. It was about control. She wanted us to know she was watching, and she always signed the notices in thick, angry handwriting. Karen, HOA president. It wasn't just us. She picked her targets carefully. The older couple down the street, the Millers, got a violation for having a faded garden gnome. A garden gnome. But the family across from them, the one who happened to host wine nights with Karen every Friday, they had 5 flamingo statues in their yard, neon pink, tacky as carnival prizes. Not a word from her. It was selective, strategic. She didn't care about the rules. She cared about power. She enforced only when it benefited her, when it made someone weaker, quieter, or easier to control. Karen had a trick. She'd show up smiling, clipboard in hand. She'd say, "Just making sure everything's up to standard." But her eyes would dart, scanning, always searching for weakness. Once, Rachel caught her peeking over our backyard fence. She claimed she was checking for pests, as if the HOA president doubled as an exterminator. Another time, she strolled into our driveway while Ethan was cooling down after training. She circled the heavy bag, tapped it with her pen, and muttered, "This isn't really appropriate for a family neighborhood." She never said it outright, but the message was clear. "I'm coming for this. I'm coming for you." Neighbors whispered about her. Some were scared. The Johnsons said she fined them for painting their shutters navy instead of approved dark blue. They couldn't afford the legal fight, so they paid. The Nguyens once hosted a barbecue. Karen showed up with a decibel meter, an actual device, and shut it down. Everyone knew she was unreasonable, but no one wanted to cross her. She thrived on that fear. She used it to isolate families, to break their will one paper notice at a time. Then came the cameras. One day, new security poles appeared at the entrance to our street. At first, we thought it was for safety, but the angles told the truth. They weren't pointed at the road. They were pointed into driveways. Our driveway. I tested it once. I stood in front of Ethan's punching bag and stared up at the lens. 2 days later, a notice arrived. Excessive garage activity, possible zoning violation. She was watching us, recording us, turning the idea of community security into her own personal spy network. Karen didn't just attack, she recruited. She whispered to certain neighbors that we were troublemakers, that our son's boxing sessions were disturbances, that our open garage lowered property values. Soon, a few people started avoiding us. Conversations died when we walked by. Invites stopped coming. Karen had turned the community into her chessboard. Isolate the targets, strengthen the allies, keep everyone just afraid enough not to resist. The moment I knew it was more than just rules was when I found her footprints. One morning, Ethan's gloves were lying on the garage floor, not where he'd left them. At first, I thought maybe he'd dropped them, but then I saw it, a faint muddy footprint on the mat. Not ours. Rachel went pale. "She was in here," she whispered. Of course, there was no official record. No camera caught it then. But I knew. Karen wasn't just issuing notices. She was testing boundaries, seeing how far she could go. And each test pushed her further. What made her terrifying wasn't her rage. It was her calm. At HOA meetings, she sat at the head of the table, sipping tea, smiling sweetly as she dismissed complaints. "We're only here to keep things orderly," she'd say. "We all want the same thing." But under the table, she was twisting the knife. Neighbors who spoke against her got surprise violations the next week. Families who stayed silent were spared. It wasn't random, it was a pattern, a dangerous one. By the time Ethan's training became her main obsession, I'd mapped her behavior like an architect studies blueprints. She wasn't impulsive, she was deliberate. She calculated every move to test limits, to intimidate, to make us feel trapped in our own home. And I realized something chilling. Karen wasn't just trying to enforce HOA rules. She was building an empire of fear, one neighbor at a time. And my family, my son's boxing dream, had become her newest battleground. She thought she was in control, but what she didn't know was that every step of her pattern was leading her straight into the one thing she couldn't fight: proof. It wasn't a notice this time. It wasn't a passive-aggressive clipboard inspection or a whispered rumor at the mailbox. It was an attack. The first strike came on a Tuesday evening when Ethan was in the middle of training. His coach was watching over Zoom. Rachel was making dinner, and I was reviewing blueprints in my office. That's when the power went out. Ethan's gloves froze midair. The screen went black. The punching bag swayed in silence. "Dad!" His voice cut through the house, sharp, panicked. I ran into the garage, flashlight on my phone glowing against the dark. Ethan stood there, sweat dripping, chest heaving, staring at the darkened webcam. Rachel rushed in too, worry all over her face. What happened? Is it an outage? But no. The streetlights outside still glowed. Our neighbors' windows were lit. It was only our house. Our breaker had been tripped. I stepped outside into the cool night air, scanning the side of the house. That's when I saw it, the panel door of our electrical box hanging open, and the faint click of footsteps retreating into the shadows. Karen. I didn't see her face, but I didn't need to. Who else would creep onto someone's property to sabotage their power in the middle of their child's live stream? It wasn't about electricity. It was about intimidation. A warning shot. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his bed, gloves still beside him. "What if she comes back while I'm training?" he asked, his voice small for the first time in years. "What if she breaks something?" I didn't know what to say. My son, the kid who faced down opponents in the ring, was scared of the woman next door. Rachel was shaken too. She kept pacing the hallway, checking locks twice, sometimes 3 times. The nurse who spent nights calming trauma patients now jumped at shadows in her own home. And me? I lay awake staring at the ceiling, fury burning in my chest. Because what Karen had stolen wasn't just power. She had stolen our peace. 2 days later, the next strike came. A patrol car pulled into our driveway just as Rachel got home from a shift. The officer stepped out, polite but firm. "Got a call about noise violations," he said. "Boxing equipment being used after quiet hours." Quiet hours didn't even begin until 10 p.m. It was 6:45. Ethan was mid-workout. The officer looked uncomfortable as he took down notes, but I could tell he knew the truth. "Honestly, it sounds like your neighbor's just filing complaints," he admitted under his breath. Still, he had to log it. And now, somewhere in the system, there was a police report tied to our address. Karen had escalated from surveillance to sabotage to law enforcement. Rachel broke down that night. "This is going to kill me," she said, her voice cracking as she leaned against the kitchen counter. "I'm already stretched thin at the hospital. I can't come home and fight this woman every day. I can't." Her blood pressure had been creeping higher over the months. Now it spiked. She got headaches. She lost sleep. The stress wasn't just emotional anymore. It was physical. Ethan stopped training as often. He said he needed a break, but I could see the truth in his eyes. He didn't want to give Karen another reason to come after him. That broke me. My son was giving up pieces of his dream just to keep the peace. And the worst part? The neighborhood stayed silent. We saw blinds twitch. We saw people glance away when we waved. Everyone knew what Karen was doing, but no one wanted to be next on her list. That silence hurt almost as much as Karen's attacks. The community we thought we joined had abandoned us. For me, the tipping point was the note. I found it one morning under our doormat, typed, unsigned, but I knew where it came from. Boxing activities must stop. This is your final warning. The words were clean, official-looking, like a court order, but there was no letterhead, no signature, just intimidation dressed up as law. That's when I realized this wasn't just harassment, this was warfare. Karen wasn't satisfied with petty violations anymore. She wanted us broken. She wanted my son's gloves hung up for good. She wanted us gone. I sat Ethan down that night. Listen, I told him, you didn't do anything wrong. Don't let her make you believe that. This is your home. You train here, you fight here. And as long as I'm standing, she doesn't win. He nodded, but I could see the doubt flicker in his eyes. He wanted to believe me. But Karen's shadow loomed large. Rachel listened quietly, tears in her eyes, then whispered, "How far is she willing to go?" I didn't answer, because I knew the truth. The first strike was never the last. Karen had just begun. That's how the war changed, from petty notices to real intimidation, from nuisance to fear. And deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before she crossed the line completely. It happened on a Thursday night. Ethan was live on his boxing stream, gloves laced, sweat dripping under the glare of the garage light. His coach watched from the other end of the Zoom call. Dozens of viewers tuned in, cheering in the chat as my son moved with quick, disciplined strikes. For a moment, it felt normal again. A little island of peace in the middle of chaos. Then I heard it, a pounding, not on the bag, not on the floor, but on the door. The front door rattled like it had been struck with a hammer. Rachel jumped in the kitchen. Ethan froze mid-combo. I felt the air shift, that primal instinct when danger crosses the threshold. Another pound, louder. "Open up!" a voice shrieked. Karen. Her tone wasn't clipped or passive-aggressive this time. It was raw, unhinged. I hurried down the hallway, heart racing as the door shook again. The locks groaned under her fists. Before I could reach it, the door swung open with a crack that echoed through the house. She had forced it. The frame splintered, wood snapping under pressure. And there she was, HOA Karen, storming inside like a conquering general. She wore her usual pastel sweater set, but her face was twisted, wild, as if every ounce of control she'd ever craved had come to a breaking point. "This garage is not authorized for this kind of activity," she screamed, her voice echoing off the walls. Rachel gasped, clutching the counter for balance. Ethan stood frozen in the garage, his gloves hanging by his sides. The webcam was still rolling. His viewers were seeing everything. Karen didn't stop at the threshold. She marched through the living room, clipboard in hand like a weapon, papers flying out as she pointed toward the garage. "This is illegal! I'm shutting this down myself." I stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "You need to leave, right now." But she shoved past me with surprising strength, storming into the garage where Ethan stood, eyes wide, his coach shouting through the laptop screen. "What the hell is going on? Who is that?" Karen turned toward the camera and sneered. "This is an unauthorized operation in violation of HOA Safety Code 7.3. She had no idea that her tirade was being broadcast live, not just to Ethan's coach, but to every viewer in the chat. And not just them. The recording was automatically backed up. Every second was evidence. Ethan's gloves trembled as he backed away. He wasn't scared of punches, not scared of taking a hit in the ring. But this was different. This was someone breaking into his sanctuary, his home, his safe place. Rachel rushed in, voice breaking. "You have no right to be here," Karen snapped back, eyes blazing. "I am the HOA. I have every right." Her words sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just about boxing. It was about domination. She didn't see herself as a neighbor anymore. She saw herself as ruler, and rulers don't ask permission. They take. As the shouting escalated, Ethan's livestream chat exploded. "Is this for real? Who is that woman? Call the cops. Now." Somewhere in the mess, I realized, every line of text was a witness statement. Every viewer was watching a crime in progress. Karen lunged toward the punching bag, ripping at the chains, as if tearing it down would erase Ethan's dream. But in that moment, she had sealed her fate. The camera had her face, her actions, her break-in. And when I glanced at the corner of the garage ceiling, I saw something else. The security camera I'd installed after the electrical sabotage. Quiet. blinking red, recording everything. Rachel had already dialed 911. By the time the operator's voice calmed her enough to explain, Karen was pacing in circles, ranting about community standards and board authority papers littered the floor like confetti. Ethan stood behind me, his gloves still on, his chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. Then came the sirens. Blue and red lights washed across the walls. Tires screeched as a cruiser pulled into our driveway. The officer who stepped inside took one look at the splintered frame, the broken lock, the trembling family, and then at Karen, still screaming about bylaws, and his face hardened. "Ma'am, you need to step outside." But Karen wasn't done. She turned to the officer with icy confidence. "They're running an unlicensed boxing gym. It's a violation of code. I'm the HOA president. I have the right to enforce this." The officer didn't budge. "You don't have the right to break into a private residence." Karen's mouth opened and closed, her certainty faltering for the first time, but even then she clung to her delusion. "I'll have the board back me. You'll see. They'll regret crossing me." When they finally escorted her outside, the house fell silent. Rachel collapsed into a chair, her hands shaking. Ethan peeled off his gloves, his knuckles red, not from sparring, but from how hard he had clenched his fists. I closed the broken door as best I could, the jagged wood grinding against the frame. Our fortress, our home, had been violated. And yet, in that silence, I felt something else. Resolve. Because for the first time, Karen had gone too far. And this time, she hadn't just left footprints. She'd left undeniable proof. The security footage, the live stream archive, the chat logs filled with real-time witness reactions. Karen thought she had power because no one ever stood up to her. But now the evidence was no longer just in my hands. It was in the cloud, in the stream, in the voices of dozens of strangers who had seen it all. Her breaking point had become her undoing. And as I stood there in the wreckage of my door, holding my son close, I knew. The fight had entered a new phase. Karen thought she was untouchable. But the truth? She had just exposed herself to the one enemy she couldn't intimidate. The law. That was the breaking point. The night Karen shattered our door, our peace, and her own illusion of control, and she had no idea the world was already watching. The morning after the break-in, our house felt like a crime scene. The door frame was splintered, papers still scattered on the garage floor, and the air smelled faintly of adrenaline and fear. Rachel moved slowly, exhausted, like her body had finally admitted what her mind already knew. We weren't safe here anymore. Ethan didn't even put on his gloves. He just sat at the table, staring at his untouched breakfast. But, as broken as we felt, I knew this was the moment to turn the tide. Karen had made her boldest move. Now it was my turn. I started with the cameras. The security cam I'd installed above the garage had caught everything. Not just her face, but the exact moment she forced the door open. You could hear the splinter of wood. You could see Rachel recoil. You could see my son standing frozen in his gloves. But that wasn't all. Ethan's live stream had recorded too. His audience had clipped the footage, posted it, even shared it with moderators. There were timestamps, comments, even chat messages like, "She just broke in." "Someone call the cops." 2 independent recordings. 2 different angles, both telling the same story. I spliced them together into one seamless video. No fancy editing, just side-by-side evidence. Plain, undeniable. Next, I requested the incident report from the police. It was simple enough: time of call, officers dispatched, reason for visit, condition of the property upon arrival, and there it was in black and white. Entry forced, door frame damaged. Homeowner states neighbor unlawfully entered residence. Even the officer's notes were damning. Subject claimed HOA authority justified entry. Informed the subject no such authority exists. I didn't need to be a lawyer to understand it. Karen's own words were working against her. I pulled every violation notice she had ever taped to our door, dozens of them, petty infractions, selective enforcement, all signed with her heavy, unmistakable pen strokes. Then I mapped them on a timeline, next to Ethan's boxing sessions. The pattern was glaring. Every time Ethan trained, every time the garage door opened, a notice followed within 48 hours. This wasn't random. It wasn't neighborhood safety. It was targeted. Harassment. I started talking to neighbors. Most were hesitant, afraid of retaliation. But when I showed them the video, when they saw her storming into my home on camera, something shifted. The Johnsons, who'd been fined for their shutter color, agreed to write a statement. The Nguyens, whose barbecue had been shut down, offered to testify. Even the Millers with the garden gnome stepped forward. But the biggest surprise came from inside the board itself. One of the members, a quiet man named Harris, pulled me aside after a meeting. He looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder before whispering, "Karen doesn't speak for all of us. She's been pushing too far. Some of us are done covering for her." It wasn't a confession, not yet, but it was a crack, a fracture in her armor. I went deeper. HOAs run on paperwork, budgets, meeting minutes, amendments, and Karen, for all her bluster, had left fingerprints everywhere. I discovered she'd been issuing fines without proper board approval. She doctored language in the meeting minutes to make it seem like rules had been voted in when they hadn't. It was sloppy, but more importantly, it was illegal. I compiled every document into a folder, evidence, neatly labeled. Anyone could follow it without needing a law degree. I remember explaining it to Ethan one night, trying to make it clear in terms he'd understand. "Think of it like boxing," I told him. "Every punch she threw at us, the notices, the sabotage, the break-in, I've caught it on camera. I've got the footage, the dates, the witnesses. Every swing she took left her wide open, and now we've got the tape to prove it." He nodded slowly, the first spark of confidence returning to his eyes. "So, you're saying we've got the knockout?" I smiled. "Not yet, but we've got her on the ropes." Meanwhile, Karen wasn't backing down. She strutted through the neighborhood like nothing had happened, gossiping at the mailbox, smirking at us whenever we passed. She doubled down at the next HOA meeting, railing about dangerous activities and reckless homeowners. But something had changed. This time, I noticed the hesitation in people's eyes, the way Harris avoided backing her up, the way the Millers stared down at their folded hands instead of nodding along. Karen didn't realize it yet, but her power was slipping. The final crack came when a neighbor I barely knew, a young mother named Angela, knocked on our door. She looked nervous, clutching her toddler's hand, but her voice was steady. "I saw what happened the night she broke in. I didn't say anything before, but I can't keep quiet anymore. She's out of control." Her testimony meant everything, not just because it confirmed what we already had, but because it meant the fear was breaking. People were starting to resist. By the end of the week, I had a binder thick with evidence. Video, documents, witness statements, timelines. It wasn't just a case anymore. It was a story, one anyone could follow from beginning to end. A story that proved Karen wasn't protecting the community. She was terrorizing it. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. Because the investigation wasn't just about proving her guilt. It was about showing the neighborhood, and eventually the law, that we weren't powerless. Karen had built her empire on intimidation, on silence, on fear. But now, we had the truth. And the truth was stronger than her lies. The investigation gave us the ammunition. What came next was the battle, the showdown, where we would finally put it all on the table, and where Karen's reign of fear would face its reckoning. The community hall was full that night. Folding chairs scraped against the linoleum as neighbors shuffled in, their voices low, wary. Karen sat at the head of the long table, her pastel sweater pressed, her smile painted on like armor. Her clipboard was stacked high with papers, her weapons. I sat in the back with Rachel and Ethan. My binder of evidence sat heavy on my lap. My hands were steady for the first time in weeks. This was it. The night it all came out. The meeting opened the way they always did, Karen speaking first. "Before we begin," she announced, her voice smooth, confident, "I want to address a serious issue that threatens the integrity of our neighborhood." She glanced toward us, her eyes gleaming. "Certain residents have engaged in unauthorized commercial activity. Boxing lessons, noise violations, reckless behavior. We all saw the disturbances. As HOA president, It is my duty to enforce order. A few neighbors nodded, uncertain. Others stared at the floor. She had controlled the narrative for so long, she thought this would be no different. Then she turned to the board. I move that we fine the residents immediately and suspend their HOA privileges. Her voice was calm, her confidence absolute. She still believed she was untouchable. I rose from my chair. The room went quiet. Before you vote on that, I said, my voice carrying further than I expected, I think everyone here deserves to see what really happened. Karen's smile flickered. This is highly irregular. Only board members. I held up the binder. No. What's irregular is breaking into someone's home and pretending it's community service. The murmurs started. Chairs creaked. All eyes turned to her. I walked to the front, placed a laptop on the table, and hit play. The projector lit up the wall with Ethan's live stream footage. The room filled with Karen's voice, shrill and unmistakable. This garage is not authorized. There she was, storming through my front door. There she was, shoving past me, pointing at my son, tearing at the punching bag. The room gasped. I let it play long enough for everyone to see the lock splinter, to hear Rachel's panicked voice, to watch Ethan freeze with fear. Then I paused it. That, I said, my voice steady, is what really happened. Karen shot to her feet, her face flushed red. This is out of context, she snapped. I was protecting the community. That video doesn't show the whole picture. They were running an unlicensed gym. I flipped to the police report. This is the whole picture. Filed the same night. Officers responding to a call about a break-in. Their notes, subject claimed, HOA authority. No such authority exists. The board members leaned forward, whispering to each other. The neighbors' murmurs grew louder. Karen's smile was gone now. Her confidence cracked. I laid out the timeline. Violation notices lined up against Ethan's training sessions. The pattern was undeniable. I held up statements from neighbors, the Johnsons, the Nguyens, the Millers, each telling their story of harassment, fines, intimidation. And then I revealed the board minutes, altered by Karen to pass rules that had never been voted on. Finally, I looked directly at her. You've built your power on lies, intimidation, and fear. But fear doesn't hold up when the truth is on tape. Everyone here has just seen the truth. The room erupted. Neighbors who had stayed quiet for months began speaking at once. She fined us for no reason. She trespassed on my yard too. We've had enough. Even Harris, the board member who'd warned me quietly before, finally spoke aloud. This board never approved half the rules she enforced. I'm done covering for her. We all should be. Karen tried one last time to regain control. You people don't understand, she hissed, her voice shaking now. Without me, this neighborhood will fall apart. You need me. But the board chair, a normally timid woman who rarely spoke, finally found her voice. No, Karen. What this community needs is fairness, and what it doesn't need is a president who breaks into homes and terrorizes families. She raised her hand. All in favor of removing Karen from her position as HOA president? Hands shot up across the table. One by one, unanimous. It was over. Karen stood frozen, her clipboard trembling in her hands. She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. For the first time, she was speechless. The neighbors didn't look afraid anymore. They looked angry, liberated. Some even clapped. The board chair spoke again, her voice steady. Effective immediately, Karen is removed from her role. A special election will be held to choose new leadership. Until then, this community is under interim management. Rachel squeezed my hand. Ethan let out a breath he'd been holding for weeks. I felt the weight lift. As I gathered my binder and turned to leave, Karen muttered something under her breath. This isn't over. But it was, because the moment she stormed through my front door, she had written her own ending. And the moment the projector lit up with her crime, the neighborhood had seen her for who she truly was. There was no coming back from that. That night, the HOA's reign of fear ended, and Karen, the woman who once thought she ruled us all, walked out of the meeting not as a leader, but as a disgrace. The house was quiet again. For the first time in months, I didn't wake up to the sound of pounding fists on the door, or the dread of another violation notice taped to the wall. No clipped voices over the fence, no shadows peering through the blinds. Just silence. The kind of silence you don't notice until it returns. Rachel sat at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee without checking the locks twice. Ethan was in the garage again, gloves laced, the steady rhythm of his punches echoing through the walls like a heartbeat. Peace had returned, and it felt heavier, sweeter, because we had fought for it. A week after Karen's removal, I stood in the front yard with Ethan. We had a new sapling in the ground between us, the roots freshly covered in soil. Together, we packed the dirt down, our hands pressing firmly, steadying it against the wind. This tree, I told him, is going to outlast all of this. Every storm, every season. It'll stand long after we're gone, just like the truth. Ethan nodded, sweat on his brow, but a smile on his face. For months, his gloves had been instruments of fear, a target for Karen's wrath. Now they were symbols of resilience again. Rachel came out with a paintbrush in her hand. She had repainted our mailbox, fresh white with bold black numbers. The little dents and scratches from months of harassment were gone, covered, renewed. It wasn't about the paint. It was about taking back what was ours. The community changed too. Without Karen's shadow hanging over every decision, neighbors began to step forward. The Millers brought their garden gnome back out, proudly placing it by their walkway. The Nguyens hosted another barbecue. This time, half the street came, laughter spilling out into the night. And something I hadn't seen in months, neighbors actually talking to one another, not whispers, not complaints, but conversations, open and easy. The board announced a special election. For the first time, people actually wanted to participate. Volunteers stepped forward to run, promising transparency, fairness, and a return to community values. One candidate even came by our house to thank us. "You didn't just stand up for your family," she said. "You stood up for all of us." Inside our home, the healing ran deeper. Rachel's headaches eased. Her blood pressure came down. She started laughing again. Not forced, not brittle, but freely, like the woman I married. Ethan trained harder than ever, but now with a spark in his eyes that I hadn't seen since before the harassment. He knew what it meant to fight outside the ring, to take hits and keep standing. One night, after practice, he looked at me and said, "Dad, I think what you did was harder than boxing." I smiled. "No, you taught me how to fight. I just used your lessons." The tree we planted became a symbol for the whole block. Neighbors asked about it. Some even planted their own. Soon, the cul-de-sac that had once felt like a prison looked like a grove of hope. That tree wasn't just for us. It was for every family who had felt powerless against someone abusing authority. It was a reminder. You don't have to give in. Karen had believed she was untouchable, but she learned what happens when ordinary people refuse to back down. Her reign ended not with silence, but with unity. I know conflicts like this will never disappear entirely. There will always be people who try to abuse power, who think fear is stronger than truth. But what we built here, in our home, in our neighborhood, is proof that they don't win, not if you stand together. Ethan is preparing for his first tournament. Rachel is at peace in her own home again. And I finally feel like an architect again. Not just of buildings, but of something bigger. I built safety. I built resilience. I built a legacy my son can carry forward. This story isn't just about one woman, one HOA, or one family. It's about power and what happens when it's abused. It's about the choice we all face when someone crosses the line. Stay silent or stand up. We chose to stand. And because of that, our family, our neighborhood, and even our future are stronger than ever. So, if you've ever had an HOA abuse its power, if you've ever felt the sting of someone using rules as a weapon instead of a shield, know this: you're not alone. We fought back. We won. And so can you. If you've ever had an HOA abuse power, subscribe now and share your story in the comments. Because the more we tell these stories, the fewer Karens get to rule unchecked. And together, we can make sure no family ever feels unsafe in their own home again.